Hi there, and welcome to our webinar today on innovation with tech during COVID-19. My name is Greg Houston, and I am part of the solutions team here at Relativity. I have a background in lit support and have spent many years doing law firm support and finding new solutions. And it's exciting today to talk to two individuals who actually came up with some new ideas on how to use Relativity during COVID. I'm joined today with Virginia Ring. Virginia is e-discovery of counsel and quality control leader for the Kilpatrick Townsend Lit Smart e-discovery team. And Andy Webb. Andy is the Lit Smart team's e-discovery technology innovation manager. Virginia and Andy work together to drive the Lit Smart team's innovation efforts, develop customized workflows to address specific client needs, and leverage Relativity in unique and non-traditional ways to manage matters beyond e-discovery. The SBA Loans Project is just one of the many examples of the innovative approach to using Relativity to assist their clients. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, so let's talk through kind of what the scenario was, and you can kind of give me some background. So in April, the Small Business Administration launched the Paycheck Protection Program to help small businesses that were impacted due to COVID. And Kilpatrick was tasked with helping your bank client efficiently manage this PPP loan request situation. So can you talk through like what made this different than the typical day-to-day loan? Like, how many loans do they have? Was it an increased number? Kind of talk me through what made this a different situation, Andy.
Sure. The client that we were dealing with typically handles 200, 300 loans, small business loans in a given year. And they're one of the larger small business loan banks that are in the industry. After the initial opening of the PPP program, they quickly realized that number was going to drastically increase. And so when we were brought in, they were anticipating anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 loan applications coming in a day that they were going to have to address.
Yeah, that's a change. That's a big change. I'm sure that was impactful. So can you help me understand with Relativity, like what was the thought process? Like, did you have to get a team of developers in and like build some separate application that was on top of Relativity? Did you use just the typical day-to-day Relativity in a different way? Kind of walk me through what your thoughts were and how that came to be.
Sure. Well, myself and a couple of attorneys on the team got together and with the client talked about what their current workflow was and what they had, what they were going to give to us, the data they were going to give to us, build these loan documents out. And really, the framework of what we needed to do was what Relativity does. It was basically a load file, and it was loan documents that were going to be loaded in. We just used Relativity as the platform for this workflow. There really wasn't any special programming that was done. We did have one component for some reporting functions that we did later develop, but that was later in the process. And really the core function of this entire workflow was already in Relativity, and we just leveraged that.
Okay. So Virginia, I think maybe you could show us like the process of what a typical loan like document would go through, and maybe kind of Andy, you can fill input with regards to things that had to be built and change things. And why don't you go ahead and take the reins? I'll stop sharing my screen, and Virginia, if you want to jump in and share your screen.
Sure. So when we were first building out this very workflow intensive process, we decided to use Relativity, and the biggest driver of why we wanted to do that really was for the ability to track and to have very up to the minute reporting. We built out a workflow using a series of saved searches and tags to kind of walk these loans through the entire process. And so you'll see here we had folders, we had the actual loan documentation, And then there were also the loan applications that needed to go with the loan documents, and also there were separate attachments in many instances. So just to kind of show you what one of these looks like, these are basically the loan documents that needed to be generated and then sent to the borrower, received back from the borrower, reviewed, and then ultimately sent to the bank for to be funded. So our team handled all of those interim steps from the point out of receiving after the bank has received the application and approved it. Our team took over and kind of guided these loan documents through the full process till they got to the funding team. So Andy, if you want to jump in here and kind of talk about what we got from the bank originally and what you would do to turn them into these documents, I think that might be helpful.
Just note that these aren't the real documents. These are a sample. Obviously, we can't show the real documents.
Yeah.
So we've created a sample so there was no kind of crazy loans that were given to them, a hamburger or whoever. I noticed there. Just a side note so people realize that and understand that on the call, on the webinar.
Yes, not real information. So what we got from the client was essentially a CSV file of lots of different columns of data that was captured from the application. We only needed a small number of those columns to create these loan documents and get it through to funding.
So they filled it out online initially then. So you had some of the data in a table, or it was accessible from like a computer already. So
yes, correct.
Okay, that's great.
So we were expecting to get a CSV of 1,000 different applications of information. So we needed a way to quickly fill out all these loan documents because each loan package is roughly 25 pages long of lots of inserted information. So we took the fields that we needed, basically did a mail merge into a PDF form in mass. And so we'd take that CSV and with a few mouse clicks, we had our 1,000 PDF loan documents ready to go. We then took those loan documents, processed them into Relativity, and the way that they were named was the application number was part of that file name. And so within Relativity, we used the replace function and took the file name, overlaid it into the application number field, stripped it out of any extra information. So it was just the application number in that field. And that became our new family ID, our group ID. And that was going to be the basis for tying in the overlay of all that CSV information into Relativity so that we could track all of this information inside Relativity, tying it directly to the loan applications.
The beginning of the
so a little bit
trail,
of
so to say.
Exactly. But all of this stuff is things we do in a normal day-to-day basis inside Relativity for loading e-discovery documents. So this is nothing new, just kind of repurposing the workflows that we already have. So it lent itself well to this. And so once we had the loan documents in, it would begin kind of the start of our process of QCing the information that we have to make sure it was valid, and Virginia's team and Sterling's team would start their QC process.
So basically, this is where I would take over, and with some of our other team attorneys on our team would kind of manage the process from here. So Andy got the documents got the information into the PDF, got everything into Relativity for us, and then we would start our workflow process. And you'll see as I go through this, there are quite a few steps and quite a few different tags along the way. And I just wanted to show you before I started all of those steps, the overall purpose of that. And that was to have a built out tracking of any one of these loans and the status of where it was in the process at any given time. So basically, by creating these tags and date fields throughout the process, if we got a question about this application 456, then we could go into Relativity, look, and we could tell exactly where it was in the process that I'm about to walk through with you guys. So once the documents were in Relativity, we would do what we called phase one review, which was basically just to go through and make sure of a couple things. One was to make sure that everything actually did properly populate in the process that Andy used. And then the second is to make sure that the information that we got in the CSV was correct for what we were expecting it to be. So for instance, we found some instances where like the signing party's title was also the signing party's name. Instead of actually a title, the person had inadvertently input their name twice. And so as you can see from the loan documents themselves, we have, name, title. If this title field is incorrect, these documents are going to be incorrect. So this stage of the process was just to double check that and flag any issues that we noticed. So we had a team of contract attorneys that would do the phase one review, and they basically would go through and check off all of these different boxes as they checked the forms. Well, they would first assign it to themselves, then they would check off the boxes, and then they would finish the phase one review. They would check review complete, and if everything was correct, documentation complete would be checked, and then save and next. And that would bring us to the next stage of the process, which involved then taking these documents, exporting them out of Relativity because they had to be sent to the borrower. And we decided to incorporate the DocuSign program to try to automate that process also as much as possible. So we can go back into the searches here and what would happen. And so this stream of workflow searches is kind of the process that we would go through. So now that document had phase one review complete, it would fall into this search for assignment to be assigned to someone to send out via DocuSign. And so in this step of the process, our team attorneys helped handle the DocuSign sending, and because we knew that could potentially involve some back and forth with the borrowers, so we wanted attorneys on our team to handle that stage. So at this point, I would go in and, in any given day, there could be 200 of these, especially early on, that were ready to be sent via DocuSign. And so whichever of our team attorneys were available that day to send them, I would assign sets of them to that team attorney using just, the fields that we created. At that point, document leaves this search that we've set up, and it goes into this search to be exported to the network to be sent out via DocuSign. Now, at this stage, our analyst technical team would go in, and I would send them an email and say, hey, there are 100 documents, 100 loans ready to be exported for DocuSign. They would export them out and organize them on a folder in our network. And those folders were separated by each reviewer. So if Nicole was assigned 20 that day, those 20 would be on her folder, in her folder on the network. Those 20 would also fall in her folder down here of DocuSign for DocuSign reviewers in the DocuSigns not sent. And the reason that we set it up this way is because then as the team attorney would send the documents via DocuSign, we also needed them to track in Relativity when they sent it and that it had in fact been sent for our overall purpose of knowing where the document was in the process. So Nicole would go in here, go to the DocuSign layout, and then she would check off that it had been sent to the borrower and the date that it was sent. So at this point, if a question comes in about what is the status of this loan, and we would be able to say, it was sent to the borrower on X date.
once we started getting these DocuSign documents back, we had a centralized email address that they were being sent to within DocuSign, and we'd have somebody go in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, pulling out those documents that have been returned, putting them into a folder, and then those documents were then overlaid back into Relativity. And we didn't want to process them back in as new documents, because then they'd lose their direct information to, who did all the review, who did the QC, all of this information. So we wanted to overlay these back into the original loan document, that the unsigned loan document is going to now get replaced with this signed version of the loan document. And the way that we did that, because we couldn't just give it a control number, to be sent to the clients, we relied on that application number. And the way we tied it back to that original loan document was the loan document was the only one that had just the control or just the application number in the file name field. So we used the file name field as our essentially overlaying field to overlay these signed versions back into Relativity. And at that point, it was really just a kind of walking through the steps of pulling the documents out of DocuSign, building the load file to overlay this information back into Relativity, as well as tagging it with specific fields that triggered that these were ready to go on to phase 2. That, yes, this is a signed copy of a loan document, and they're ready to go to phase 2.
And so at that stage, we had, another set of searches set up where when documents would come back in and signed copy received was yes, but they had not been reviewed for what we called phase 2, they would fall into this search and they would be batched for phase 2 review. And in phase 2 review, there were kind of two components to that. Our team did part of this review, and then the BSA team from the bank also reviewed the documents, because the borrowers in DocuSign would attach different of their business documentation for their small business that then the bank's team would need to review for those purposes. So our team would go to the phase 2 layout and would again go through the loan documents to check for a few things, mostly to check and make sure that the borrower signed each of the places that they were supposed to put an electronic signature. And also, one of the major issues that we were checking was also that the Social Security numbers were put in the correct place. So when we first started this process, we originally were having the team checking off the different check boxes, and if something was missing or incorrect or a problem, we were having them put a comment saying what the issue was. We realized pretty quickly that was going to be a difficult process to manage because of the multiple issues we were seeing with these documents that were being returned. The main ones being the driver's license front and back wasn't included, or the Social Security number wasn't included. So we had sort of these buckets of problems that different files had. So we created additional fields of the common issues we were seeing, and then we have fields where we were tracking when those issues were fixed, basically. So at this stage in the process, our team is looking at those things. Again, they would assign it to themselves. If everything is good to go, they would tag final loan packet complete, and then they would tag review complete and move on to the next document. While this was also going on, like I said, the bank's team was doing a review of the documents, and we gave them some training in Relativity, and we set up for the bank's team a series of searches and also a layout where they would go into the same documents that we were also doing phase 2 review of, and they would look for their purposes. And if everything was okay and good to go on their end, they had a trigger tag that was like our complete tag. They had a yes, proceed to funding. And so when one loan document, when any given loan document had a yes, phase 2 was complete and a yes, proceed to funding BSA, then we have a series of searches for our final QC and what we called production process, which was really more of an export of the document to the bank's funding team. And so it basically, those documents would fall into these searches. We had final QCs set up, and then they would be exported out and sent along to the funding team. One thing here that we also encountered is that basically Kilpatrick needed to sign these documents, to sign off on our review being complete of them and that they were ready to be funded. So we kind of went back and forth a bit about how we were going to do that. We didn't really, when we're thinking of hundreds of these at once, we didn't really want to have to export them to PDF and then have someone manually go into each PDF to put an electronic signature. We didn't want to add another DocuSign phase that was, yet again would take more resources to handle. So what we decided to do was image these when they were overlaid back in. And then when our team completed their review, they would go into the image and go to that specific document that needed to be signed, and we would put a redaction box that had Kilpatrick, and that was our signature on these documents. We ran this by the bank, and this plan worked for them. It's, an electronic signature here on this document. So that was the process that we used. And then this would be, obviously, when this is exported out, this redaction box was included or was affixed to the image that was exported. So one thing that, as I mentioned, this project, it all happened pretty quickly. And there were some things that we realized that first, few days were going to be issues, and we had to kind of pivot and figure out a new game plan to handle certain areas. And one of those was the Social Security number issue. So I would say probably about a third of these loan documents, the form where the Social Security number needed to be put we weren't able to make that number a required field because the number needed to be put in different blanks depending on whether the individual was a U.S. citizen or not a U.S. citizen. So basically, a lot of people, because it wasn't a required field, didn't include their social. So what we basically ended up doing was building out a whole separate workflow that we called our SSN workflow of how to deal with those. We didn't want to have to send the DocuSign back out, the original DocuSign back out, because then the person would have to go through, re-sign everything, reattach all their documents. So we created a series of tags and searches again to basically track that the document needed the SSN fixed. We would export out the overlaid copy, and Andy created a second template in DocuSign where we would send it out just requesting the Social Security number and an initial blank. And then those would come back in and be reviewed to be sure that the social was there and to move forward through the process. So that was kind of one way that we ended up having to do a pivot there and figure out a game plan pretty quickly those first few days of the project. So one other component of this project was that our client wanted very frequent reporting, and we also built those reports out in Relativity. And each day, at the end of the day, I would go in, I would, click on each of these 5 reports they wanted. I would export to file, save as an Excel, save it on my desktop, and then email the 5 out to the client every day. And so this process sparked an idea with our team to build out an application that would help automate this process.
And this is the piece where we we come up with the workflows, we come up with the ideas internally, and we do a lot of innovation within the group. This is where we kind of lean on our, the people that we trust and that we partner with to build the bigger applications, because this integrates a lot of different pieces on the back end of Relativity. And so we went to our partner and said, we want to build this Safe Search report tool. And so this is what we came up with. This is something that you give something a name. The name's going to be in the subject line of the emails that go out. You choose who's going to receive a copy of it. It can be anybody inside the firm. It can be external users, because the reports that are generated are all attachments. They're Excel attachments to the emails. So that's very helpful information that can just be used right away as attachments. And then you just choose your safe searches. So in this one, we had all of the daily reports that we're going to go to the clients. We're adding here, and you can choose what you want. They're there. Then the include save search results is the important one. This is what we kind of had the idea for the Safe Search report tool before this, but this project really solidified the reason we wanted this little toggle, because this is going to take all of those safe searches and the function of clicking save to file and saving a CSV file for every one of those. That's going to automate that piece and attach each of those saved searches as a tab inside a single Excel file to the report that gets generated. And then you can choose how often you want it to run, the time of day that you want it to run, and then how often you want it to run, whether it's daily, weekly, or monthly. So for this one, we wanted it daily, and we save it and we go.
I think that's brilliant. That looks great. That's an amazing tool to add to things.
So we had this idea to build this tool out, like Andy said, and then we decided, hey, because we basically were trying to build out a tool that would give us a tally of the number of documents in each of a series of saved searches, and we decided based on this project, hey, let's expand this and let's give the results. And so this is just an example of what would go out to me, others on our team, and the client on a daily basis. And they would basically be able to click through this Excel and see each of the reports in those searches. You'll notice number 4 is not there, but that's because there were no documents in that search that day. And they were able to, easily click through the daily reports. I didn't have to go in every single day, save them all, and email them out. It would just automatically send.
That's a great, it kind of wraps everything up together and makes it definitely easy to digest. So now looking back, I'm sure that there were steps that you learned things. There's things that you found better ways to do it, things that had to probably maybe be redirected a little bit. So Andy, can you talk us through, can you start us with some of the things that you found, kind of the ways that lessons that were learned, what did you have to change, and what kind of got adjusted to fit the profile of this process a little bit better?
Sure. So the biggest thing that really kind of caught us off guard as this went on was the fact that it kept going on. The very initial SBA PPP loan that went out, that whole thing was open for a total of about 24 hours before all the funding was exhausted. So when round 2 was proposed and approved and looking to go live, the bank and everybody else was expecting that it was going to be another mad dash again to fund, to get the loans approved, get them funded quickly, and we were going to have a short period of time to work on that. That ended up not being the case. We did get a giant influx within the first couple of days that our workflows were well designed for. They're really well designed to take a lot of documents or a lot of loan information and get a lot done quickly. But there's time involved with those various steps that were involved with creating the loan documents, which work well on scale. But when we started to trickle down and get 2 documents a day, 1 document a day, it became a little bit more of it was a process to just go through for 1 document. So there are a few things that we would like, had we known it was going to go on for as long as it did, and it has, because the funding is still open and still hasn't been exhausted yet, that we likely would have automated some of those functions earlier on rather than having it still be such a manual task. And that goes for every step of this phase, having to do the document creation, the document exports, the document signing. There are various pieces of this that we would have, had we had the time up front, look to integrate a little bit better into Relativity and have those functions be a little bit more automated. But instead, it's just kind of been just going through the motions with a smaller volume than we had anticipated at this point.
Yeah, and from the workflow side of that too, I mean, we might have built this out a little differently, and rather than, had different people assigned for different portions of this, we might have structured it differently to where we had team members that would handle a series of these documents through the whole process instead of, having and done some of these steps themselves, like exporting the file out as it's ready to be exported, rather than having our technical team doing that. So ultimately, what we developed out and the workflows worked, and they definitely worked great for the big bulk that we received in the beginning. But had we known how long it was going to stretch out and the volume decrease, we might have built some different workflows in place.
I just say, ultimately, the client seems to be happy with the overall process and the results. I would say, is that correct?
Oh, definitely, yes. And I mean, the changes that and the lessons learned that we have here that we're talking about are more on our team's end. That the end product that the client received, they're certainly happy with. But just to increase efficiencies for our team, there might have been some different ways that we could have structured things.
Yeah. Okay, great.
And, I touched on this when I was doing the demo earlier, the bucketing of common issues. We just didn't anticipate the issues that we were going to get. And, going in along the same lines, the third bullet here, we also didn't anticipate the volume of communication we would receive from borrowers. We thought we might get some emails back. Basically, the DocuSign system, you're able to see the email address of the sender, which again is one of the reasons that we wanted our team attorneys handling those. But we just didn't anticipate how many people would reach out directly to the person that sent them the DocuSign or to our team. And so we didn't have a great structure in place to track each of the communications received and the content. Like, some people would have questions about what documents they needed to attach, which was more a question for the bank. Some people would, wanted to withdraw their application. They decided they didn't want to proceed. And so we came up with some tags to track that sort of on the fly. In hindsight, it would have been nice to have that built out from the very beginning, so we could do less of that sort of tracking in the comments field. But we made it work, and we, got everyone's communications responded to. But that was definitely an unexpected aspect of this.
Well, thank you for sharing this with us today. It looks really great, and it's been very interesting to see this alternative use case. It's interesting because it is regular Relativity, but it's had just a little twist and really taking all this paper trail, so to say, electronically, where you can see every step of the way and everybody stays very informed. It seems like a really good, complete tool to kind of help. And I can also see this being used for other uses as well. If people had, just kind of, it's a different thought process than the typical production of documents and review. It's more of a tracking tool, and I can see that being useful for other things. Any final thoughts before we go?
Yes, thank you so much for your comments and for letting us kind of show this tool to you. Andy and I and others on our team, really, we love doing this kind of thing, coming up with creative ways to use Relativity and other technical tools. Our team gets asked pretty frequently to come up with alternate workflows or something just outside of the norm of e-discovery. We really enjoyed the brainstorming and the figuring out a workflow and making it work. So we're pretty proud of the work that we did for this client and thankful for the opportunity to show it to you guys.
Okay, well, good job. Andy, any thoughts?
I mean, just to kind of piggyback on what Virginia was saying, we get tasked to do a lot of this stuff, outside of the box of normal e-discovery, and we really utilize Relativity and leverage every piece of it that we can, whether it's just using it for tracking or tagging or review. The fact that we all understand it, we all understand the language and how to use it, and we can leverage it for other projects is really helpful for our team. So we're thankful to have Relativity in our toolkit.
Okay, great to hear. Thank you both, and thanks for joining us today on this webinar.